Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm your host, Ian Fisher, and we're airing this episode on April 29th, just 2 days shy of the all-important May 1st decision date. So that's the deadline by which all of you seniors out there are going to let colleges know that you plan to enroll. Most of you probably have already made that decision. And so you've just got a couple of days to let those colleges know. And then we are off to thinking about juniors again. So we've got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about how to get organized in the college research process, both with respect to financial aid and college admission. We're going to talk a little bit about the athletic recruitment timeline. So if you're an athlete who's thinking about playing college sports, that's a great segment for you to stick around for. But before we do that, we've got a great guest here to start the show. I'm going to introduce Rebecca Barr. She is here with EF Gap Year, which you can find at efgapyear.com. And we're really happy to have Rebecca here on the show. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Ian. Thanks so much for having me today.
I'm glad to have you. Really excited to talk about gap years. And as I was thinking about that in my introduction, May 1st might be the point by which a student chooses to accept an offer of admission. But for every student, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going off to that college in the fall, because a lot of students may be choosing to take a gap year after they graduate from high school. Now, the gap year is something I think a lot of families are comfortable with. They talk about it, but maybe we've got some listeners out there who are newer to this process and might be unfamiliar with the concept of a gap year. How would you define a gap year for those who are unfamiliar?
Absolutely. Great question. And I think we see a whole range of different, different abilities in terms of knowing what a gap year is all about. So we see some families who are used to the idea of a gap year, have heard about it for a long time, and others for whom this is really the first exposure to this concept. So I would define a gap year as a semester or a year on, not off, typically taken between high school and college in order to deepen one's personal, practical, and professional awareness. So it's something really intentional. It's something that folks are structuring not just as a time to sit back and bide your time until the next opportunity, but it's really a time to seize the moment and to get out in the world to learn experientially and to grow and develop in new ways.
So a year on, not a year off. And that is because you really typically, when you have a gap year, are thinking about not necessarily continuing with your academic study, but changing your point of focus. So you're engaging with the world in a way that you might not have been able to do previously in high school. I hope. Does that sound right to you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So there are a lot of different ways I think that students can engage with gap years. What are some examples of things that students might do in this time on before they make that transition from high school to college?
Yeah, great question. I think we see a few themes from students who are looking to spend that time on. One of the things they're looking for is cultural immersion. So being able to travel, being able to be in a new location, gain some of those skills of cultural awareness, global perspective, language skills, some of those crucial things that you really need to be doing through living, through immersion, through speaking a language every day, through being in a new environment. We also see students who want to gain some professional experience. So that might look like a job in their hometown. It might look like an internship halfway across the globe. It can really look a lot of different ways. And students are coming to really get that sort of prototyping of what they might want to be doing later in life. So they're really taking that time to explore a career path that they might go down later. And another thing I think we're seeing more and more right now, especially as students want to give back to the world in some way. They want to be doing an activity where they're learning about global issues, learning about their own role in finding solutions to these issues. And maybe that looks like volunteering in their hometown or working on a political campaign. Maybe it looks like going across the world, working and from local NGO leaders in another part of the world and really seeing how they approach different topics. It can look a lot of ways, but we're seeing especially that trend, I'd say, this year in terms of students trying to figure out what their role is in solving some of the global issues that we face today.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's great to think about it in a variety of different contexts. A lot of people think gap year means you're up and traveling out of the country, but there are a lot of different ways to take that gap year and explore different sorts of opportunities. You took a gap year, right? When you were a student. Okay. So you're speaking also from a place of personal experience here. Just if you think back to your own time when you were in high school, you applied for college, you heard back from schools. At what point did the gap year start to be something that you were seriously considering as a part of your own experience?
Great question, Ian. So for me, this was 10 years ago now. I
Okay.
went to high school in Alabama, and that was not a common option for students. A
Yeah.
gap year was not well known. In fact, I didn't really even have the term gap year in my vocabulary when I
I didn't
decided to
either.
take this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I had already applied to a lot of colleges, gotten into my top choice college, was really excited about it. And then I found this opportunity to go to Turkey to spend a year there, really immersed in the language and the culture. It was through the State Department fully funded program, which was great.
Hmm.
And I, ended up going there, spending this amazing year and deferring my enrollment to college. So I had a great college admissions officer at Georgetown who helped me work through what that process would be for me. So basically, I say, I commit to you, I'm putting down my deposit, looking forward to seeing you in a year. In the
Hmm.
meantime, I'm going to go off, have this incredible experience, and come back to campus more prepared, more ready to contribute to the campus community, more prepared academically, more prepared socially. And I definitely found that when I returned that I was much more ready to maximize my time on campus from day one.
I have seen that from students that have taken gap years, both when I was in school and then students that when I was working in admission asked for gap years and then came a little
Mm,
bit later. Is there's a sense of maturity, readiness, even though it is time on, it's away from school, and so it changes, I think, your mindset a little bit, so that you're not always focused on classroom learning, reading, arithmetic, that kind of stuff. It changes your perspective and allows you to come back to college for your first year with a better sense of how to fully commit to what your studies are going to look like. So there is a
100%.
real pronounced sense of maturity, and I think a different perspective that comes from students who are exploring those gap years. And I would just like, as an aside here, from an admission standpoint, from a just mechanically speaking, you typically will
Mm,
apply for college as normal in your senior year. And then once you gain admission, just like Rebecca did, you then have an opportunity to request that gap year from the institution where you're planning to enroll. And most schools are going to say yes to that request, especially if you have a plan in mind. Now, if you just say, I want a gap year,
mm.
but you have no plan for what that's going to look like, I think schools can be a little concerned that, yeah, we want to make sure that you're still actively engaged with the world in some respect. And so having that plan early on, I think, is really important. How did you find this program in Turkey, and how do, more broadly, students find opportunities to explore gap years? I think a lot of students think conceptually it sounds really cool, but then they don't know exactly where they would look for that kind of an opportunity. Turkey sounds far away. That seems like something that's not necessarily at your fingertips when you're in high school.
Absolutely. Great question. And I want to zoom in on one thing you said there as well, that it's so important to have this plan. And that's really what colleges are looking for as
Mm-hmm.
students take those next steps. That's what they're looking for in those deferral requests. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Thinking about how the process begins, I think that's where I've been doing a lot of outreach to counselors in high schools across the US, because counselors are gradually increasing their knowledge about gap year options and about how that fits in. So we've been working together with the Gap Year Association, which is another great resource out there for folks who are starting that research process, to
Mm-hmm.
really help educate counselors and educators, as well as students and parents, about what these options look like. So I would say a process of self-reflection is great. Think about where you're at as you're a sophomore, junior, or senior in high school. Whenever you're thinking about this decision, it's never too early, I would say. Think about what it is that you want to get out of that experience. Are you looking for cultural immersion? Are you looking for something closer to home? Are you looking to give back? Are you looking for an experience that will really challenge you, push you out of your comfort zone? Think about that. Think about your budget. So think about how that would fit in with your college plans. With your, you can use 529 accounts for gap year programs. Sometimes
Mm.
you can apply for different gap scholarships. There are a lot of ways to make gap years financially accessible, but a lot of that requires a little bit of forethought as well. So you can get those scholarship applications in, so you can find the right opportunities. And I think you'll also find that folks in the gap realm are really, we have this really consultative approach. We really want students to find the right experience for them. So don't hesitate to reach out. If you're just doing some Googling, you see a program that looks like it might fit your interests, reach out. There are also individual gap consultants that work one-on-one with students to help them find the right gap path for them, which is great if you want to do something that takes you to a lot of different places. You want to put different pieces together. And of course, I love our EF gap programs as well, which combine language study, service learning, and internships, so that you can get some of those main things that students are looking for in their gap year. We help you put that together. And we can also point you in another direction if our program isn't the right fit for you. But it can often be a good fit for students who are looking to do some of those things out in the world.
Gotcha. Now, I'm circling back to your experience. You said you're going to Georgetown. You went off to Turkey. Did you, by any chance, study abroad when you were in college as
Sure
well?
did. Yes, went back to Turkey, went to Egypt, and then ended up working abroad for many years after I graduated.
So I'm wondering, do you have like a particular kind of curiosity or interest in international cultures, international studies in a way that positioned you for this kind of gap year, where another student who might be thinking, I don't know, I might be interested in physics and I don't think I need
Yeah.
to go to Turkey for physics, or I could study abroad when I get to college. What's the real opportunity that's created by this gap year? I'm wondering, what is it about this particular moment in time where there's a
Mm.
real opportunity for somebody to springboard into a different kind of way of thinking about themselves or the world as they transition to college? Why is this moment so
Mm.
important?
Such a good question. And, my story is one tiny story in a huge bucket of other gap
Sure,
stories.
of
And I'll
course.
say that one common thread, though, that we see is that many students do find their quote unquote thing when they are on their gap year. And for me, that happened to look like international relations and international education. But for other students, I'll use one of our alums, Annabelle, as an example. Annabelle was planning to go to art school before her gap year. She was pretty excited about that path, didn't really know what she was getting herself into, really just wanted the gap year as some time to take a step back, get out into the world, learn experientially. She wanted to work on her Spanish skills. And as part of her gap year, she spent some time working on a coral reef restoration project in the Dominican Republic. And her eyes were totally open to this new world of marine biology. She loved the coral reef restoration project. She, found this passion that she'd never been able to explore. She'd just never really known was an option for her potential academic and career path. So she ended up totally changing schools, changing to study marine science. She's now a marine science major at Boston University and
Hmm.
just loving it. And it was this process that she wouldn't have even been able to go through if she hadn't taken a gap year. And this is a very common theme we see in our students, that it's not necessarily something international, but it's something that they're exposed to. It's something that adds value and adds a little bit more refinement to their path as they go to college and beyond.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a contrast, I think, between students that go through high school, they apply for college, they've got a sense of certainty about what it is that they want to study and how they perceive that to push them into a particular career path. And then
Mm.
there are students that are so much more open. They might have an answer about what it is that they want to major in because they feel they have to have an answer to that question, but they still are open to these possibilities. And my assumption would be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like the latter kind of student, the one that's a little bit more open to possibilities, to exploration, both about the world and themselves, is going to be a better fit for a gap year. But maybe you can push back on that if you don't perceive that distinction to bear out in reality with the kinds of students that are interested in a gap year.
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy that you've put there. And I think most students fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, that
Sure.
they sort of know where they want to go, but they're open enough that they want to keep exploring that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say we have students, so I'll use another example because I always find examples make things a little more tangible. Another student of ours, his name is Diego. He knew he wanted to be in the fashion industry. This was his passion all growing up. He was planning to go to fashion school. And after taking his gap year, he was applying to his top choice fashion school, and was able to really refine his application to focus on some of the things that he was observing when he was working on a service learning project in Costa Rica. So he was seeing the negative impacts that the fashion industry was having on the environment. He was learning about ethical labor practices, all of these things that he had never thought about before, and was really able to reflect on and refine his career in this very specific industry. He's still very committed to this and now is at Parsons and doing great things in fashion and design. But he, really was able to refine and think more critically about that path thanks to his gap year. So I think we see students like that as well who have their thing. They know what they're passionate about. They know what they want to do. And a gap year can add some layers to that, some real thickness to it, for lack of a better word.
No, the perspective I think is helpful, and that's whenever I talk about liberal arts and sciences as a potential pathway for students, the way that other classes that are outside of your chosen major help to enhance your understanding of your particular major, give you different perspectives on a way that you might solve problems. And so I think the gap year has an example of that kind of value, right? Where it's like, I know what I want to do, but now I can see it from all these different perspectives, and that might influence the way that I approach my career later on down the road. Just because I like to be a contrarian sometimes, and I think some people like to ask this question, who is not a good fit for a gap year? Like, are there students out there who wouldn't benefit? I know that a small percentage of students ultimately do gap years, but are there students out there who just don't benefit so much from this kind of an experience?
Yeah, I would say it's all about finding the right fit experience. So maybe not every experience is right for every student, but to be honest, I think every student could benefit from this time. We are channeled through this very specific education system as we grow up. We are all blinded by our own communities, our own environments, what we're raised, what we see around us. And getting out of that comfort zone, getting out into the world, and really being able to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, to think about the world in new ways, can be great for everyone. So it's all about finding the right experience and going through that process of critical thinking about who you are and what you want to be doing in the world.
It sounds a lot like the advice that we give. Now, you work with EF Gap Year. And again, that's at efgapyear.com. If anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about your organization and how you support students in this process, what can they find on that website? Where should they go and poke around? How would they follow up after this conversation?
Definitely. Check out our website. There's a lot of great info there about our different year, semester, and short-term programs. And is a place there where you can contact us, reach out for more information. You can also contact me directly at rebecca.barr, BARR at ef.com. Happy to answer questions, happy to be a resource for anyone who's just considering this path and considering these ideas. And follow us on Instagram. We've got a group in Costa Rica right now who are posting a lot of great photos and reflecting on their gap experience at EF Gap Year on Instagram.
That's great. Great set of plugs. If anybody wants to send Rebecca fan mail, that's rebecca.barr at, you said ef.com.
That's right.
Great. Thanks a lot for coming. I think the gap year is just such an interesting concept, and we've talked about it in a few different ways on this show. So listeners can go back into the archives to find some past conversations, but just so cool to hear from someone who's had that experience and currently sees students in a variety of different contexts that are being successful in that space. So I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks so much, Ian. It was really a pleasure.
All right, folks, when we come back, we're going to talk about athletic recruitment, so you won't want to miss it. Don't go away.